So what Okay. It is a pleasure to introduce you to Josh Shurley, who is Vice President of National Veterans for Peace. Um, we've been working together, it is for about 5 years, Josh. And Josh is coming tonight to the program to discuss his recent trip to Nicaragua. And thank you, Jerry Condon and Michael Kramer, for joining us. But Josh, I think you're going to start talking about the trip, and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Susan, and great to be here. And yeah, real privilege and an honor to be invited here to talk about Nicaragua. And I'm happy that Michael Kramer joined, and I see that Jerry Condon is here as well. So that's very good. Jerry was really the driving force behind this whole delegation. So I'll definitely turn it over to Jerry and Michael, and hopefully we'll have some good Q&A. I'll try to be brief, and you guys feel free to jump in if there's anything I left out. I'll just try to go over some of the highlights of our trip and some of the things that I think we need to know going forward. With all this fascist nonsense going on out there in society, disrupting the idea of peace at home, peace abroad. What can be done about that, right? Well, the I like to think that in some ways the antidote lies in other places and other ways of thinking. The indigenous worldview, is one example of that. But another example is, I think, revolutionary societies. I was fortunate enough to go on a similar delegation some years ago to Cuba, which was very eye-opening at the time, and this was very sort of along those lines, very similar in the sense of it's just I'm still processing so much, that we came away with, and I'm sure others feel the same way. So yeah, yeah, it was a great delegation. I think about what, 9 or 10 days, something like that. So in a nutshell, it consisted of myself, along with Jerry Condon from the National Board, and of course Michael Kramer from Northern New Jersey. We also had Dan Shea from Portland, Douglas Ryder from North Carolina, Al Glatkowski from Virginia, and then Chris Smiley, our communications director, who lives in Nicaragua full time, met us down there. And then we were also helped out quite a bit by some local friends, Colleen Littlejohn, as well as Becca Rank, who did a lot of our translating, and they were just a invaluable help. So yeah, I mean, I think probably a lot of us are familiar with the general history of Nicaragua, not only of Nicaragua, but of the history of sort of U.S. involvement there, going back well over a century when U.S. Marines first landed there and facilitated all sorts of imperialism, all the way through the Somoza dictatorship, which went on for many decades, and well into the 1970s. During the 1970s, you had, of course, the Sandinista Revolution, and in 1979, culminating in the Sandinistas coming to power. And then from that point on, you had the dirty war, right? The Contra War, the U.S. backed uh, ugliness that went on throughout the 1980s, and which in many ways facilitated I guess, the start of Veterans for Peace, right? And many of some of you were a part of that. I think Paul Cox was around during those years, and certainly Jerry Condon and many others. Yeah, and then so in 19 yeah, so you have the period of time where the Sandinistas are in power, right? Sort of a leftist revolutionary government, very much sort of similar to the revolutionary ideas of Cuba. And this is an interesting uh, thing to note in the history and the trajectory of Nicaragua up to the present day, is that you had this period of time that the Sandinistas were in power up till about 1990, when they actually, there was an election, and they lost the election, right? And so what did they do? They stepped down, and there was a new government that took power in 1991 during what's called the neoliberal years, and under the presidency of Chamorro and some others, that lasted throughout the 90s and early 2000s. So for a period of about 16 years, the Sandinistas were out of power, right? And then in 2006, there were elections, and Daniel Ortega, the former president and Sandinista revolutionary leader came back to power in 2007, and they have been there ever since. So we sort of have this, this trajectory of the Sandinistas being in power and then being away for some time and now being back. And so we sort of have the ability to look back and compare and contrast those different time periods. And that certainly comes across, during, when talking to so many people that we spoke to during this delegation. So, yeah, again, I just can't thank so many people enough, but especially Jerry Condon, really, for just getting the ball rolling on this, and really for just setting the tone so well the whole time. We set out with basically four sort of overarching goals in mind. We wanted to learn about the challenges faced by the Nicaraguan people and the achievements of the Nicaraguan Revolution. That was one. We wanted to look at the impact of economic warfare or sanctions on Nicaragua, which are significant, and how that affects the Nicaraguan people. We also wanted to meet with our brother veteran Brian Wilson. I'm sure many of us know Brian Wilson or know of him, who lives down in Nicaragua full time, and of course we know the incident that happened to him back in the 80s, and just the terrible toll that has taken, which is representative of so much that has happened as a result of U.S. intervention around the world, but especially in this part of the world during that particular time. So we met with Brian Wilson and some other friends as well. And then finally, we wanted to push back on the U.S. regime change propaganda, and that's the piece that I think is for me anyway the most interesting and the most eye opening. Just what to take away. There's a lot of division and misunderstanding about Nicaragua, particularly in the last few years. And I didn't fully understand some of those things. So I'm really glad that I got to go on this delegation and get a better picture for sort of what's really happening and what the last 5 to 7 years were really about in Nicaragua. But we'll get into that. But if there's any, I would just say a couple of the highlights. One would be the fact that most of our meetings were sort of facilitated by what's called the Juventud Sandinista, the Sandinista youth, right? The young people, which really are at every step of the way, and just at the forefront of the ongoing revolution. And that's what I think is really comes across, that this revolution is not something that happened years ago. It's in the past, it's in history, it's continuing today. And to see so many young people that were not even born, during the 80s, to see them carry on the revolution, and it's their revolution. They are very much a part of that, and that really comes across. That was very inspiring to see. And so, we'll talk about maybe some of the ways that happens, but in a lot of ways, that's the foundation of this sort of revolutionary thrust, right? Involving all people, including the youth, and everybody is a part of it, rather than each of us being sort of separated individuals, where things happen to us. This is very much a social organism, and that was pretty great to see. So yeah, the youth. And then the other big thing, of course, we're looking at some of the achievements of the Nicaraguan Revolution over the years. When it comes to things like healthcare, education, so many other things. So to touch on healthcare, huge strides in healthcare, right? So much like the Cuban Revolution, one of the first things that was really important to set out to do, with the Sandinistas coming to power, was to basically meet the basic needs of people, and that's something that we are certainly not doing here in the United States, and something that you are seeing very much in Nicaragua. So immediately getting out there and meeting these basic needs. Healthcare, of course, is the basic need, and so things, for example, like we got to go out and see some of these, they're called maternal birthing centers, or casa maternas, I think is the term. in some of these communities where women who are pregnant who are about to give birth can come and actually stay in these sort of facilities. It's like a home where they can come and give birth, and they're there for the last period of time for their pregnancies, and because of that, especially in rural areas where people don't always haven't historically had great access to healthcare, they're really going out and putting these centers where the people are, rather than expecting people to come to the capital, which a lot of people, that's a challenge. Um, and anyway, you can just see the success. Something like an 80% reduction in maternal mortality rates. It's a huge feat. There was something like 24 such clinics that existed, back during the neoliberal years that I mentioned, and today there's something like 300 or just under 300 of them throughout the country. And that's really remarkable. And not only just the maternal birthing centers, but also just basic health clinics that are sort of popping up everywhere. There are also mobile health clinics that drive around and go where the people are, right, and meet those needs. And so this is again very much like the Cuban model, where you have healthcare providers going out into the communities, knocking on doors, asking people, what do you need, what's going on, and then meeting those needs. Who would have thought? And that spills over into other things too, right? Like, for example, one of the ministries that we looked at was the ministry of the family, basically, right? So there's a huge focus on attending to the needs, in particularly of women and of children. So, looking at things like domestic violence and some of the things that happen, social strife that happens in the family and things like that, and really, um, things like public education, um, getting out and teaching people, some of these how to mitigate some of these things, right? How to deal with abusive situations, and in many respects, we asked a lot of questions about this, um, how this gets done, and so that model of going out to talk to people in their neighborhoods and delivering healthcare that way. You questions are asked, or people will say, "Hey, you really ought to check on this person down here. There are some things going on, or maybe somebody is being neglected, or things like that." And so you really see this spirit of community and people wanting to sort of help out. And um, anyway, it was really remarkable. So different than the sort of commodified and transactional nature of our healthcare system, if you want to call it that. It's so impersonal and clinical and detached from humanity in a lot of ways. And so this was in many ways the antithesis of that. But yeah, and then another big thing to mention before I forget, which I permeates all levels of governance, is the focus on gender balance, gender equality. I can't remember the exact statistic. Maybe Jerry can correct me, but I want to say Nicaragua is the fifth or sixth best in the world in terms of women in leadership roles, right? So, whether that's in the legislative body, um, or at the local level, there are women in all these roles, and they actually have a pretty interesting model. So if you're looking, for example, at the leadership of a municipality, you'll have a mayor. If you have a mayor who is a male, there's a vice mayor, or I think they actually call it like a co-mayor that's a female, and vice versa, right? So you see that, for example, the president is Daniel Ortega, and the co-president is, of course, Rosario Murillo, the vice president. And again, you see that at all the ministries, right? There's both genders are always represented in the leadership, and so that's interesting to see. Um, yeah, and then another big thing kind of goes along with meeting basic needs. Just to touch on is education, and education is free from not just primary and secondary education all the way up through high school, but college and university, trade school, technical school, those kinds of things. In fact, we visited a technical school that teaches various skills. One was oriented a little bit toward tourism and facilitating the service industry and the tourism sector. Another college that we visited sort of focused on agriculture and food production in all sorts of ways, and that was also very interesting. But in terms of education, one of the big achievements, again, much like Cuba, they sort of borrowed that model and I think this was sort of the first thing that happened after the Sandinistas coming to power in '79, was immediately going out and just attacking this problem of illiteracy, right? The majority of Nicaragua's adult population was unable to read and write. And, of course, when you have, I mean, we see it in our country today, right? Where you have, what do these fascist authoritarians thrive on? Ignorance and uneducated people, and people who don't know their rights and don't know their law and don't know where they fit into a larger context. It's much easier to grab and to maintain control, when a population is uneducated and in the dark. So what the revolution did was send high school students out, all around the countryside to these far-flung places to teach literacy, much like the Cuban Revolution did. And we got to meet a couple of those individuals who were being honored, and they're a little bit up there in years, but they were, I guess, high school students back then. Really, it was a very moving event to be a part of that, and to see the appreciation that people had for that campaign. So there was that. Let's see, what else did I want to talk about? Yeah, and then the other big thing was the focus on cultural identity and the arts, right? So, first of all, everywhere that we went, we were greeted by almost every meeting had some sort of like a performance, or somebody did a dance, or there was singing or music. Nicaraguans are very enamored with their dance and music, and that was lovely to see. But this celebration of culture, of cultural identity, and the role that plays, in all things, and so much of in terms of politics and revolution and all of this, revolutionary politics, is reflected in the arts. And so it was really beautiful to see such a vibrant artistic community. And then all of this kind of goes back into the sense of cultural pride, and this feeds into the education, which feeds into the sense of spirit, the community that is being fostered. And in a lot of ways, it is the opposite of what we see here in the United States, where that sense of community is the thing that needs to be destroyed. It needs to be dismantled so that these power hungry individuals can get their claws in us, so to speak. It's a lot harder to do where you have that strong sense of community. And so, yeah, getting out there, meeting those basic needs, eradicating poverty, is just a huge part in the goal of the Nicaraguan government. And much remains to be done. Nothing is ever perfect. A big obstacle in terms of eradicating poverty, of course, for many years has been the economic warfare being levied against Nicaragua, in the form of U.S. sanctions, right? So that has been detrimental for sure, for the economy of Nicaragua. However, we got to see, we got to get a little glimpse of some of the ways that Nicaragua has been able to mitigate some of those harms, and they're doing so quite well, under the circumstances. So just a couple of things. We found out that Nicaragua is about 80 to maybe 90% food independent, right? So they have what we would call food sovereignty. Most of what Nicaraguans consume is being grown in the country. So this is, lessens the reliance on imports and things like that. So that makes them a little bit more resilient to sanctions than certain other countries. Um, and then the other big thing was in terms of energy infrastructure, Nicaragua is like 80% renewable energy. And so that's pretty big. And that's another sector that's much more difficult to attack through sanctions, again, like we see in other places. So those are two areas that the revolution has been pretty successful. Yeah, and just going out, seeing the health clinics, seeing the focus on poverty eradication, the celebration of the arts, and the promotion of this sort of gender balance, right? And um, you know, focusing on women, focusing on children, focusing on the youth. This is not something that they just pay lip service to. This is something that really is apparent everywhere you go and you see it. It's really really nice to see. One of the probably the most touching things that, at least in my view, where I believe we were in, I think it was Matagalpa. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the things that the Nicaraguan government does is once a month in whatever community, and this is all facilitated by the FSLN, by the Sandinista movement, by the youth, right? What they will do is they will bring basically food packages, food staples to the mothers of the fallen martyrs, right? So people who were killed during the wars during the 1980s or before. Anybody who's still got surviving parents from those years, the Sandinista youth will visit them once a month and bring them, just some basic foodstuffs to get them through the month. And it's just a way of saying, of acknowledging the sacrifice of their loved one, not just giving them a token and then, thanks for your service and, see ya. But they're coming back. This is decades later and still coming back. And what touched me especially about that was that it's not just the Sandinista fighters and their families who receive these care packages, but also the those Nicaraguans who fought for the Contras, for the U.S. backed death squads and all of that. Those folks, they get the same benefits basically, right? Because we're all Nicaraguans and all in the spirit of sort of reconciliation. So I thought that was pretty moving. And that was for me, I think, probably one of my biggest questions was how they have been able to move on from that and how that looks going forward. Are there these sort of splits, these cleavages in the society like we see in so many, like in our own, and what does that look like, and what are the prospects for it going bad again? And so that, in a lot of ways, leads us up to what I do want to make sure we touch on today, and that is the 2018 events. Back in 2018, there was a sort of a coup attempt, kind of a color revolution type thing. According to some others, that you'll see it in the press labeled as a pro-democracy protests in 2018. And I had questions about this, right? Because you hear so much. You see UN reports about these things, and even within leftist circles, you have a lot of folks who refer to Nicaragua as a dictatorship, and I just had a lot of questions about that. So it was very interesting to see a little bit of that up close, and speak to some people. We met with a UK journalist, John Perry, who writes about these matters, and he actually hosted us for a visit at his home with his wife Abby, and they gave a very moving account of what happened personally to them during these very unfortunate few months, where you had these individuals go out and establish these basically roadblocks at certain points around the country. It wasn't all over the country, but it was in certain areas where they would block the roads with these makeshift obstacles. They called them tranques, and the people were referred to as the tranquistas, and they would go out and basically terrorize the population. And what were they demanding? They were demanding that the government step down and that they go back to the sort of neoliberal years, right? The people who were backed by the United States. Um, Yeah, so I want to make sure we talk about that. I won't go too much into detail, but what I'll just say is, come to find out, and it was pretty much the same old playbook that we've seen in Cuba, that we've seen in all sorts of countries, that we see in Israel today, frankly, right? Where you have U.S. support for a regime that will do despicable things, will lie, till the cows come home, and in many ways sort of own the media voice, and so a very distorted image gets put out there, and it's very hard to for the unknowing public who doesn't really, if you didn't know any better, you would think, oh, this is terrible. What are all these uh, you know you know how these things happen in the media. So yeah, I'll maybe save that for some Q&A, but I wanted to make sure I bring in Jerry and Michael and see if they had anything to talk about. Oh, and I just before I do that, I wanted to mention one last thing, and that is that we got to see a lovely woman named Dorothea Granada, who was a former nurse that moved down there in the '80s and basically stayed. And she was a real thrill to talk to. And this was right down the road from the tomb of Ben Linder. We got to see Ben Linder's gravesite. Ben Linder was a U.S. College student. I think he was a college graduate, a young engineer who went down there in the '80s and was killed by the U.S. backed Contras. Anyway, and so yeah, I want to make sure we maybe can get into some of the events of 2018. But before I do that, I'd like to give either Jerry or Michael a chance to jump in if they had anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay, Jerry.
Uh, yeah, I'll jump in. I'll turn it over to you in a minute, Michael. I hope you'll say a little bit more about the color revolution and the Sandinista youth movement. But I just wanted to say that one of my goals for this delegation was to get Josh Shurley to Nicaragua, so mission accomplished. And you can see why that was a great thing to do. Wonderful presentation, Josh. I would just want to add, you pretty much covered all the bases there, but I just wanted to mention that we can't really underestimate how important this delegation was to Nicaragua. They gave us a lot of encouragement, a lot of assistance, and we were on Nicaraguan television and radio regularly while we were there. I got a call just yesterday morning from the Lautaro Sandino, the Nicaragua's ambassador to the U.S., thanking us and congratulating us. So, solidarity works at least two different ways, back and forth, and it's really important to keep that in mind. Obviously, the considerable achievements of the Nicaraguan Revolution. Imagine being like one of the poorest, still one of the poorest per capita nations in the Western Hemisphere, but committing itself to providing free healthcare and free education, is and quality education, quality healthcare that's ever improving, a real commitment to gender equality, as Josh mentioned. So they have a revolution well worth defending. And I think I'm going to ask Michael to say a little bit about that. But before I do, I just want to mention that our report, we wrote up a kind of a brief initial report on our trip, put it out as a press release, an article. It's been published in at least a dozen different online publications, nationally and internationally, in English and in Spanish. And I'm still getting excitement. I just got a message today from the Nicaragua Solidarity Organization in the UK, asking us to send some more photos from our trip because they were going to include our press release in their report. Several of us were reported back briefly at the Zoom meeting the other day of the Nicaragua Solidarity Coalition, and there was a lot of excitement there about VFP going to Nicaragua and coming back with such strong messaging. We're working on a longer report. It's going to have more comprehensive than our initial report, and it'll have the photos and We're also going to be VFP is going to be co-sponsoring a webinar with the Nicaragua webinar series, which is from the Nicaragua Solidarity Coalition. That's going to be on Sunday, June 22nd. And I'm sure we'll have a nice big PowerPoint presentation to share at that time, and we'll let people know. We're going to keep on, I'm sure we're going to be doing an interview on VFP Radio and hopefully some other media. So we're going to keep up this, maintain this important connection that we have with the Nicaraguan Revolution and enjoy the benefits of that two-way solidarity. So having said that, Michael, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Jerry was our mission commander to some extent. Really want to thank him. Just since we're all members, just a little bit about the delegation itself. It wasn't easy. It was 7-8 days long. Some folks stayed longer on their own time. We arrived at different times. We left at different times. And most of us had never met each other, let alone work together. But you can be proud of this delegation. This was like an all-star team, A team. I mean, we just clicked. There were challenges. We were in a 3-car caravan. One of the cars broke down. We all had to fit in 2 cars, and Josh had a ride in the back of a pickup truck outside, we were cramped in. These aren't air-conditioned cars. These are the tropics. We are older, squeezed in, 3 in the back seat of a small car on a 2.5-hour trip. So there were challenges, but there was never a breakdown. I mean, our internal solidarity was like strong, and this is the way any delegation should be. I think we had maybe one kind of day off where we just sort of chilled out, but did work inside. But we were always on the move. And also challenging was being flexible. You think you're leaving in a half hour, but no, you're leaving in 15 minutes. You think you're going to point A, no, you're going to dinner at point B. Things were constantly changing, and there was never an issue with any of us. So I think that was really be really pretty proud of your Veterans for Peace members, and both Josh and Jerry, who kind of led us along. Also, I don't think enough could be said about our hosts. Colleen Littlejohn opened up her house to us. A very comfortable house for maybe 3 or 4 people. But when you put 9 people in it, you have issues of water supply. And we met the challenges. Instead of the shower, it was a jump in a pool and then kind of pour some clean water over you. But there were challenges, and she was just incredible, made sure we had breakfast every morning. And just like really plugged in whatever we needed, drove us, was part of our, volunteered her vehicles for use. Becca Rank is just an amazing person. I can't say enough about her. She's one of the North Americans, like Colleen. Colleen maybe 45 years ago, and Becca maybe 20 years ago, who have committed themselves to the Nicaraguan people and the Sandinista revolution, like 150%. And they were incredible facilitators, were with us wherever we went. And there were other people who also plugged in and were helpful. This couldn't have been done without the, as Jerry said, we were a main news item the first day we functioned as, some of us arrived early, but the first day we functioned as a delegation and visited a very important memorial to the Sandinista movement on a hill with a statue of General Sandino. That was like the top news story, at least on one of the major TV stations. So much so that I think it was a day later, we were at a restaurant on a lake, and someone came over with his family and said, "Oh, we saw you on TV. Can we take pictures of you?" You know, he wanted pictures of his family with us. We really were appreciated.
With the VFP flag, Michael, which you fortunately brought along.
Yes, I remember to bring the Veterans for Peace flag. You see it behind Jerry, and it was a tremendous photo op. Wherever we were and took pictures, we always made sure to take a group picture with the flag, and something to remember for any future delegation. So if we do, when we do post our photos, you'll see that the flag is always there, and people we met wanted to be holding the flag or behind the flag, and so that was one thing. And in terms of like solidarity between North Americans and the Nicaraguan people, it is cemented in blood. As Josh said, we did visit a grave site and spent some time there. Benjamin Lindner, an engineer who was working on a hydroelectric project for a small village and was targeted by the Contras, him and his co-workers. The other last thing is the appreciation the Nicaraguans had for us was to make sure we had like security around us, an amazing group of people. When we were on the move, they were able to stop traffic and make sure we didn't get hung up in traffic. The luminescent green glove sticking out of a car window evidently stops all cars in Nicaragua. I don't know if it works here in Jersey City. I don't think so. But they were great. And we showed our appreciation to them because whenever we would stop for a meal, we made sure that they had not only a meal, but they had the same meal that we had. And I think I'm certain they appreciated that because when we left, there were hugs. An amazing group of people, of security team. I won't say anything more. So lastly, I'd like to say something about the Sandinista youth who we met. We met youth who were like 15 and 16. We met youth who were going either to technical school or were in university. And we met older youth who were kind of leadership, probably late 20s, very early 30s. And I had mentioned this on the webinar we were on just a few days ago. It left me, and it took a while because I didn't think of it immediately, but it hit me. And it left me with a tremendous sense of optimism about the future of Nicaragua and the Sandinista revolution. It's no secret that the leadership, Daniel and Maria,
Maria.
Right. They're older, and, what comes next? And there are a core of incredible people who I know will kind of move forward in the leadership of not only the movement, but the whole country. I mean, we met Dr. Garcia, a medical doctor who runs a women's health clinic in Managua. We met and we actually had dinner with them. Two attorneys who are really in the leadership role of the Sandinista youth movement. And we met like some amazing teenagers in Matagalpa. I mean, they weren't faking it, man. They were all for what the Sandinista movement is. And we also had the opportunity to meet mayors. I mean, it was an important delegation. And the solidarity, like Jerry said, worked both ways. We gave it to the Nicaraguans, and the Nicaraguans gave it to us. And just lastly, if you look at current events now in Central America, very sad, the situation in Panama, which is just like apparently like defenseless, and has opened the country to the introduction of U.S. military forces once again, 3 bases, an air base, a naval base, and a ground forces base are going to be hosting U.S. troops and all kinds of other things with the Panama Canal. Well, this is not the case with Nicaragua. The events of 2018 that Josh spoke about was a wake-up call for the Sandinista revolution. And I can only say that it could be for imperialism a hornet's nest. I mean, the people, large numbers of people are ready to defend themselves by any means necessary in Nicaragua, politically and militarily. So I come back very optimistic about the future of the Sandinista revolution, and want to thank both Jerry and Josh for their solidarity and leadership in this
Michael.
challenging delegation to some extent, physically.
One really quick thing to add, and that is Nicaragua's commitment to defending Palestine, which goes way, way back and remains current. They have just rejoined the South Africa case against Israel in the International Court of Justice. And they've also taken Germany to the Court of Justice for also sending weapons to Israel to carry out this genocide. So that remains a really important commitment of the Nicaraguan Revolution.
Yeah, just to quickly add to that, they pulled back for a few days they withdrew from working with South Africa on the issues of Palestine at the International Criminal Court. And Nicaragua said they were financially challenged to do so. And it is expensive. Nicaragua is a poor country. And when you have to go to The Hague, it's not just one person who goes. It's like 5 people have to go.
Yeah, but they found the money and they found the money and they've recommitted.
Right.
You know what, guys, I'm sorry. We have a number of questions. Can we?
Oh, sorry for that.
Thank you. And thank you all for coming tonight. We can tell Michael and Josh and Jerry how exciting the trip was. I'd like to get to some questions. Tarek, you have your hand raised.
Tarek is he just went to let the dog in. Come over here. You can ask your question here.
Okay, thank you.
I'm coming over there.
He's going over there, but he has to get to the couch quick, otherwise the dog will get up and there won't be any room.
Let's see the dog first.
You
Oh,
want
have
to
you
see
met the dog?
The dog is better looking. Go, get up. Go on.
Ask your question.
Go on. Okay. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
But I just want to say, I could say this all in one word, what I have to say. But wow. I mean, I think the delegation was so important. And also, this presentation that you guys gave was really, wow is the word. It's terrific. So it's great. It's very important. And I think it means so much that we have this kind of solidarity with other people who think in a revolutionary way, especially with people who support Palestine, because that right away says a lot. So thank you guys a lot. I mean it. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tarek.
Thank you. Are there other questions? folks could raise their hands. But could I just ask a question? You talked about the change in healthcare. In Cuba, we know that people, when they're nurses and doctors in a specific community, that they have to live in that community. They work with the people in the community. They're aware of young students who are also going to school there. Is there a similar kind of structure that is set up in Nicaragua? And could you talk a little bit about the healthcare system?
You want to
I
take
don't
that,
know if
Jerry?
we have more detail about that. I'm assuming that pretty much everybody who's working in those clinics live in those communities. We didn't hear about that, Susan. Um, the, there's also a private medical system that's somewhat parallel to the public. The for-profit system is very suspect.
Mhm.
And exploitative in some ways. There's also nonprofit private healthcare, which some of us were able to visit. The one that's run by Jubilee House in Ciudad Sandino, and they're very careful to coordinate with the National Health Ministry so that they're not duplicating or competing in every way, that they're trying to fill the holes. And this is a constantly evolving and very conscientious process. But beyond that, Susan, I think it would be really terrific for you as a lifelong professional health worker to lead a health delegation from the U.S. And I'm sure there's people there
Yes.
that would do a great job making it happen.
Thanks, Jerry. I mean, it's kind of one of the first issues that are addressed post-election and post-revolution, which is really important for the people, is maintain healthy people. And it sounds like there's changes in the educational system. Could you talk a little bit more about the students? Because you're talking about, right, 15, 16-year-olds, which is very exciting. So I'm assuming that it sounds like high school, there are classes and organizing that go on. And we could learn a lot about that.
Yeah. Well, once again, you're challenging us to maybe a little bit beyond what we learned. But it's say we have first of all, free education, and they've actually, as they built hospitals and clinics around the country, they've also built community colleges around the country so that people don't necessarily all have to move to Managua um, and can stay home. And there's a variety of, Josh mentioned agricultural focused colleges. There's technical focused colleges. We went to a place where people were learning basically the restaurant industry, cooking, bartending. We got to sample some of their drinks. They were very good. Best cappuccino Michael ever tasted, he said.
Right.
So they're training them on lots of different levels, and exactly what the changes are. And this is there's a lot of feedback in this process with both health and education. So they are constantly committed to constant adjustments and improvements. And not sure if I could say more than that right now. Josh, you have more to say about the education, your observations about their
Yeah, just that I think you nailed it. Just that the open access. So for example, that agricultural college that we went to, these are students that I guess would be sort of just getting out of high school, and they're learning skills, whether it's with animals or with crops. There's all sorts of things there. But these were kids that were not from wealthy families. These were people from campesino families out in rural places. And they were in there learning in some cases some pretty heavy scientific curriculum, and working with various machinery and stuff that was way over my head. But yeah, I mean, the quality is there. And so, for example, just that site where that college was established, it was only, I think it was the first year that this particular school had been opened. A few years prior, it was for years a private university. It was the kind of a place that only the children of the wealthy could attend. And they took that and they got rid of that and they turned it into a place that everyone can attend, especially the children of these poor farmers. And they are now the ones who are the predominant student population, and that's just beautiful to see. And you know, we can't really speak too much to the details, but you know, the quality I think was pretty evident. And yeah, I mean, we actually sat in on some other classes, got a little presentation from each class on all sorts of interesting things. It was great. But yeah, I mean, just the fact that this quality education is for everybody, not just for a few. That's that was the big takeaway, and I think really remarkable.
Yeah,
Thank
just one thing on that. If you graduate high school in Nicaragua and you want to go to college, study in university, you give your top three choices, and you will get one of those three choices. The only schools that have after high school certain testing to see if you qualify is the medical schools. There are 3 medical schools in Nicaragua, and it's not automatic. It's the only schools that are not automatic admission that are kind of more selective.
Thank you. And I would just ask Jerry, you've been there before. Can you talk a little bit about the changes you've seen from last trips to now?
Well, yeah, this was my 9th visit to Nicaragua. I started to count. I didn't realize there'd been that many. I was there 5 times during the Contra War of the 80s. So, of course, there's been a lot of changes since then. Now, people might remember that after a decade of Contra War and sanctions, the U.S. was able to support an alternative neoliberal candidate who actually won the election in 1990. I mean, if you could call it a fair election with Nicaragua having a gun on its head and having sanctions at its head and being funded, having the opposition funded by the U.S. But the Sandinistas said, okay, you won the election. We're going to step aside and go into the opposition. And that was pretty amazing. That's probably the first time in Nicaraguan history that had happened. So for the following 17 years, this neoliberal government did everything they could to run the country into the ground, pretty much the way that Trump is trying to do in the U.S. right now. They defunded everything that meant anything to people. They looted the treasury. They destroyed the healthcare system and the education system. And so in 2006-7, the Sandinistas and Daniel Ortega were actually reelected into power. Things were in the shambles. So the real comparison is what's happened the last 17, 18 years since the Sandinistas have returned to power, and that is really beyond amazing. It's almost like what China has done. I mean, in terms of turning things around, and it's done so in a way that's transparent, that's well organized, and that inspires people. So yeah, there's some people in Nicaragua that don't like Daniel Ortega. There's still enemies of the revolution that exist in Nicaragua and certainly beyond. But the vast majority of people, especially the poor people, especially the poor people in the countryside, are totally enthusiastically supportive of this government. Daniel Ortega gets consistent pop ratings of over 70% approval. So there's and as Michael and Josh pointed out, the youth are strongly committed and very well organized. So the future looks bright in Nicaragua.
Yeah, just
Thank you. I'm
want to
sorry, go
add
ahead.
one thing. I heard the word China, and just a word about Nicaragua and China. For years, Nicaragua had relations with Taiwan, and those were broken. And I'm not sure when, but in the last 10 years, maybe, Nicaragua established relations with People's Republic of China. And it's becoming a very strong relationship economically. We saw a few big department stores that are owned by Chinese companies, and that has been an unknown. Commerce there is on a very small scale for the most part in Nicaragua, even kind of people selling stuff in the street. And recently, China has given a gift to Nicaragua of 2,000 buses to upgrade the interurban and urban transit system. And people can now ride in, and 500 have been received, and the rest will be forthcoming. You know, you have to have warehouses with spare parts and people trained to repair them and stuff. But so it's a work in progress. But they have 500. And that's a big difference that I saw on a previous trip, that people can now travel in Managua in a dignified way. You get on a bus, it has a number, rather than somebody calling out where the bus is going and is a free-for-all to get on in the front and the back. No, the bus is neat, the bus is clean, the seats are neat and clean, and this is part of the relationship.
And it costs about 25 cents.
Yeah, so the buses were given as a gift to the Nicaraguan government, and the Nicaraguan government sold them to the bus cooperatives that maintain the bus network in Nicaragua. So that is a little example of the relationship between Nicaragua and China.
Thank you. And I think, and thank you for the comparison, because I think certainly today in this country, we really need to have some hope and belief that we can also change what's going on here. So it's important, I think, for us to understand, and again, I'll echo what Tarek said, really important that you all made the trip and come back with this information and talk with people here, because we really do need, I think, to have a sense of optimism that, in fact, we can have an impact and make changes in this country. Anything to add, and any questions from anybody else or comments?
Well, thanks a lot for having us. And this is good practice for us, because we're going to be hopefully doing a lot more of this in the next few months.
This is terrific. Thank you.
We'll make sure it gets an invitation to our June 22nd webinar.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad Jerry mentioned that. June 22nd. That's the Nicaragua Solidarity Coalition, right, Jerry?
That's correct. They do a monthly series of webinars on Sundays, certain Sundays, but this will be the June 22nd. Yeah.
Terrific. Thank you. We can tell that you're all very excited about the trip and learned a lot. So thank you for coming, sharing.
And now it's time for me to run off to a Golden Rule meeting. So I'm going to say goodbye and wish you all a good business meeting. And thanks for all the great work that New York City VFP is doing.
Thanks, John. And thank you all. Again, any questions? Tarek, you had something. Yes? Go ahead.
There it is.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank them. Am I unmuted? What?
You're taught. We can hear you.
I'm okay? Yeah? Okay, fine. It's just said a lot just now, but basically, I want to thank you guys again. And I really think that the reason there's no questions right now is because you covered so much, and you covered it really thoroughly. So it's like, that's the ultimate compliment in a way, that there are no questions. You know, people just sitting there absorbing. I mean it. No, it's absolutely great. So thank you. So you're in good form to go out and preach the gospel. Really, wherever you go.
Thank you, Sherry. Sherry has a question. Go ahead, Sherry.
I hate to disappoint Tarek. I've just been sitting here deeply listening and so profoundly grateful. And I was delighted you met up with Dorothy Granada. She was the nurse at Nuremberg Actions at Concord Naval Weapons Station when Brian was run over. And I'm delighted, of course, that you saw Brian. I guess it's been a deep puzzlement to me, the vitriolic sense of the Sandinista government being just such demons at this point and only for personal wealth and gain. And I've never been able to put my arms around how to combat that. We have Brian over here as a super strong, and even Brian gets harangued for his continuing support of the Sandinistas. So if there's any thoughts you have beyond what you've already said about how we might challenge or convert or go back to the previous enthusiasm that people had for Nicaragua.
I have a couple of thoughts about that, Sherry, and briefly, some of that stuff, first of all, you can never push back against. It's a constant stream of well-organized propaganda. It does confuse a lot of people. And then some people are genuinely confused because of certain relationships they had with people in Nicaragua that ended up on the wrong side of the barricades. And my good friend, dear departed friend, Chuck Kaufman, who headed up the Nicaragua Solidarity Network and an Alliance for Global Justice for many years, often said, you just can't really ever successfully push back against all that stuff. What you really need to do is focus on the accomplishments of the revolution because they speak for themselves. And I think there's a lot of truth to that, although I do think it's also important to push back because you see it in so many places when you're getting it from 10 different directions, including, maybe some UN human rights organization, some other human rights organization, the European media, the US media, and some stories about these poor Catholic priests that are being persecuted. It's hard not to say, well, something's got to be wrong there. And it's a big task, but I think so. First of all, remember the accomplishments of the revolution, what the revolution is really about. And second of all, remember that the U.S. has never given up overthrowing that revolution and dominating all of Latin America. And that's where this torrent of lies emanates from.
Jerry,
Yeah.
if you guys have a talking point sheet that could be attached to the minutes of things to highlight as far as the accomplishments of the revolution and things that are not true kind of thing, that would be very helpful, I think.
Okay, well, think about that. Of course, we're putting that information in every presentation and including the article that we're working on now. But perhaps we can also boil it down to a talking point sheet that people would find helpful. Not for tomorrow, though, Sherry. Thank you, though.
We did leave out something important, and that is the autonomous regions. We didn't have the opportunity to visit them. They are unique. Nicaragua borders on the Caribbean as well as the Pacific. And the area of the country that borders on the Caribbean is different linguistically and ethnically from the rest of Nicaragua. And based on a Afro-West Indian population / Garifuna, who speak English, as well as two major indigenous tribes, the Mosquito, and I believe visit the Suma. And they have huge autonomous regions. There are universities and schools where education, first language of education, is in the language of the Garifuna and the Mosquito and the Suma. And we didn't have a chance to visit these areas, but these areas that are, from my understanding, are very particularly for the Sandinista revolution because of the advances that have taken place in these areas that were the most underdeveloped of an underdeveloped country, Nicaragua. These were the most underdeveloped areas. Maybe Jerry knows a little bit more.
Yeah, I have been able to visit the autonomous regions. These two autonomous regions on the Caribbean coast take up about a third of the land mass of Nicaragua altogether, and they're administered autonomously with a very special relationship to the national government. The Sandinistas are very popular there. As a matter of fact, I was an election observer in 2021 in the Northern Autonomous Region, and that was the highest vote for Daniel Ortega in the entire country. So they're very pleased because, among other things, the government's commitment to infrastructure. They built all these high quality roads. Used to take like over a day of dangerous travel to get to the Atlantic coast. Now you can drive there in 6 hours, so which means people there can move their products to market, and it just provides more of a integrated, unified country. So there's a lot of important ongoing successes there with the Sandinista relationship with the autonomous regions. But even there, once again, every once in a while you'll hear the CIA type of propaganda against about any contradiction that might exist between some indigenous people and some of the national government, and sometimes there are problems. They get exaggerated, blown up, and propagandized. So next time we go, we'll have to make a big point of spending some time on the Caribbean coast.
Yeah,
Thank-
I would just add that yeah, there are certainly some things I have on my list to dig into deeper next time, and certainly knowing better Spanish is always a good idea.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, and going back to the to how to kind of push back against some of those narratives. I'm somebody who went in not really sure how much of that stuff was true. Was it sort of halfway true? Was it a little bit of um, and yeah, I mean, what I'm struck with is just how dishonest those portrayals really are. um, yeah, I mean, I always say, there's a couple things to keep in mind when we hear these sort of pro regime change narratives coming out of Washington. One is who benefits from this thing, this narrative, and number two is follow the money. And so you look at who benefits from this 2018 coup attempt and all the narrative behind that. Well, who benefits is the neoliberal Washington consensus and business as usual. Getting rid of this shining example of what is possible when you have revolutionary solidarity. And in terms of following the money, I mean, you look at who these people are and who they represent. For example, there's a media outlet, CN, it's 100% noticias. I can't remember how to say it exactly in Spanish. Maybe you know who I'm talking about, Jerry. But they're sort of this opposition outlet, this pro neoliberal outlet, and some of the folks who back that were the primary key players in this thing. And these are all people who have been sort of groomed by Washington and the National Endowment for Democracy and these kind of outfits to affect pro-Washington regime change. And just in recent months, what do you hear there? You hear, oh, all of our funding is drying up. Yeah, because of USAID. And so, yeah, these are all American intelligence agency cutouts. It seems to me pretty obvious. So all that stuff is becoming more and more apparent. So, there's so much value in people going down and seeing for themselves, or at a minimum calling for media voices to go down there and really spotlight these things. This is what media voices should be doing. Anyway, that would be my big recommendation is just to get more more of a spotlight down there on what the people and the youth and the most marginalized of Nicaraguan society have to say, because it's quite striking. Like I said, it's the same old story.
Well, we have a number of really special connections in Nicaragua. One of them is Brian Wilson, of course, who lives there. We had several really wonderful visits with Brian. But another member of our delegation, some of you know, Chris Smiley, lives in Managua now. He went down on the VFP delegation in 2019, fell in love with the country, came back, fell in love with a Nicaraguan woman, owns a house and has a Nicaraguan wife and a 9-month-old baby daughter. And he's right in the middle of things there. He says he just loves living in a place where there's a revolution going on. And he's our social media guy, actually has the title of Director of Communications of Veterans for Peace, living right in Managua. And he actually said, even though he'd lived in Nicaragua for a few years, he learned more on this delegation and had a lot of his questions answered. And he's now also in touch with the communications director of the Juventud Sandinista youth group. So that's all good too.
Thank you, Jerry. Rachel Clark has a question. Go ahead, Rachel.
Yes, I have a question about USAID because I think it's Brian Bertlet who lives in Thailand mentioned that actually it was not dismantled. It was observed by the Department of State. And those who were impacted by diminishing USAID, were their projects carried on by the State Department or this complete erased, but the other secret operations observed? What is the reality of this area?
Well, you're asking a whole new huge topic there, Rachel. A lot could be said about it. For my part, I have to run to another meeting. I'm sorry. But yeah, USAID is a mixed bag. It combines regime change operations with somewhat very much needed humanitarian programs. So that's a very complex topic to unwind. It would take a while. Good topic for discussion.
I was
I
just
gotta
going to say,
run.
we could,
Thank you very much, everybody.
thank you. We could have a major meeting just talking about USAID. So thank you. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, double thanks.
Thank
Yes,
you.
Thanks so much.
thank you. And you're welcome to stay if you want to have a meeting. And Josh, our meeting tomorrow is at 1:30. I'm sorry.
Okay, I'll be in touch about that. Yeah,
Perfect.
thank you, Susan, and appreciate you having us on, everybody. And this is a real honor and pleasure to be here.
Take care, Josh.
Take
All right,
good
take
Great
care,
to
care.
everyone.
have you here. Yeah. Thank you,
All right.
guys.